In this lesson, we'll talk about the MVC design pattern. Now, before we discuss the details of MVC, I should first make sure you understand this term design pattern. A design pattern is a template for a design that solves a common recurring problem for some given context. There are many common design patterns found in object-oriented software development. In fact, the most frequently used patterns are cataloged in this book called Design Patterns: Elements of Reusable Object-Oriented Software, written by these four authors, collectively known as the Gang of Four. So if you ever hear the phrase, the Gang of Four book, this is the book they're talking about. But this defines a number of common patterns, things like abstract factory or singleton. I think it defines a total of 23 altogether. This is a great read. If you haven't read this book, I would highly recommend it to you. The Model View Controller, or MVC design pattern, is arguably the most important design pattern used in iOS development. It classifies your application objects into one of three roles, either a model, a view, or a controller. This pattern defines the role a given object plays and how that object can communicate with other objects in the system. Let's look at each one of these roles. The model represents the data in your application and any logic that operates on that data. We've seen a couple examples of model objects earlier in the course in the artist and album classes. Each object manages relevant data about the particular entity and provides methods to operate on that data. Model objects are specific to a particular problem domain and are not necessarily tied to a single application. In the case of artist and album, they're tied to a music domain, but could potentially be reused across multiple applications. Next is the view, and the view represents the user interface. This is the part of the application that the user sees and interacts with. In an iOS app, this is represented by the various user interface elements found in UIKit. Similar to the model, views aren't necessarily tied to a particular application. Obviously, the classes in UIKit are used across a wide variety of applications. One of the really important aspects of MVC is it dictates how objects can communicate. We don't want our model and view to talk directly to each other, as this would introduce an unnecessary and unwanted coupling between these two components. This would greatly reduce the reusability of our objects and bind them directly to our application. Instead, we introduce this third component called a controller. The controller acts as the mediator between the model and a view. As user actions are performed in the view, such as entering text or tapping a button, those changes are intercepted by the controller and then propagated to the model. The controller is likewise notified of any changes made to the model, and then can in turn properly update the user interface. In the case of an iOS app, the role of the controller is handled by an object called a UI View Controller. The remainder of this chapter will focus on helping you understand UI View Controller objects. You should now have a better understanding of the purpose and importance of the MVC design pattern. Understanding and properly leveraging this pattern will help you create more flexible, maintainable iOS applications.